your franchise operations manual. It's not some static document, or as Bryan is going to share, it's not an 800-pound gorilla. It's time to rethink your operations manual as a franchisor. Look at it as a central information hub that's going to direct your franchisees in the future of your franchise system. And coming up next, we have Bryan Garner from Manual Makers. This is it, Bryan. This is going to be the pivot point for so many franchisors out there, emerging, established. The goal for our conversation is, for all the brands out there, really energizing their ops manual and making improvements. And so I'm glad to be spending some time together today.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed Fran Camp tremendously last week, and had lots of really great conversations with a lot of great people. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you participating, and everyone out there. Bryan Garner, the president of Manual Makers, and a really amazing company that we've been working with, and I know our clients value. And as to Fran Camp, if you're out there, just check out the Fran Camp conferences coming up. But so Bryan, this is your specialty, and if I could set the table, we have franchisors, whether startup, emerging, established, at different parts of the franchise journey. They're looking at their operations manual. Either it's been established, in process, or needs improvements. And what I'd like to discuss today is how they should be viewing their manual, how it should be evolving, and really the best practices that they need to be mindful of, and really how to improve everything that's going on.
Yeah, there's the old way of doing an operations manual was to just open up Microsoft Word and start to tell people everything that you know. And very often we wound up with 600 or even 800-page gorillas that attempted to be all things to all people. And folks would go so far as to say put their recipes into an operations manual, which is all well and good. It's just that every time you add a recipe or remove a recipe, then you have to update your ops manual, create a new version, communicate that. And very often the franchisee isn't the one making the sandwiches in the back of the house anyway. So that information then had to be duplicated into a learning management system or a training guide. And you alluded to this in the introduction, is that creates risk. You now have duplicate content in two different places, and when one gets updated, did they both get updated? And if not, then you've got ambiguity, you've got some challenges that when you're sued, if you're sued, franchisees can latch on to. Look, we're not even really sure what the standard was.
So Bryan, let's talk best practices. I think if we're going to set up a foundation, almost if we're setting up a blueprint for franchisors out there, I think we start at the beginning of, I'm an existing franchisor. How should I be viewing the ops manual in terms of, the different goals I wanted to achieve, whether it's compliance, franchisee assistance? How do you look at it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that existing systems wind up coming to us for, in that the way that we view manuals today, the brand standards and ops manuals today, is that it's one piece in your library of franchise communication. So the audience is the franchisee, and the franchisee needs to know how to perform the items that they're obligated to perform, right? So the franchise agreement may say you have to do X, Y, and Z. Refer to the ops manual as to how to do that. So the ops manual is there to show people how to provision the systems and to what the standards are, but the actual doing can come in many different forms, right? So we have learning management systems, we have marketing guides, new unit opening guides. These more targeted documents are part of a larger library that speaks specifically to an audience And the ops manual now becomes this information broker. And it tells people where to go, how to use the resources available to them, so that they can comply and so that they can get the full services of the franchise company. So
So Brian, the ops manual itself, are you saying it's not one thing, but it's going to be all these components together?
well, the ops manual itself, as you know, is a thing, right? You've got to have the table of contents in the FDD. It also becomes the sort of the intro for a franchisee to know all things about running their business. But as you mature, as you develop more in-depth information for specific roles within a company, then it does make sense to have additional documents, such as training guides, training videos, new unit opening guide, marketing guide. A library comes about. Now, the topics are somewhat the same, right? You have to have some marketing topics in your ops manual, but then you also have them in a marketing manual, and then possibly a local store marketing manual, and possibly a grand opening manual. So when you update that topic, how does it get updated in all four of those manuals? Keeping track of all of that information becomes more like managing a library than it does managing a book.
Okay. So when brands come to you, or where you see brands struggle with their ops manual, what are the typical mistakes that, or some of the common mistakes franchisors are making?
One of the biggest ones is being too detailed in the ops manual. Going into these very specific SOPs or the very specific vendors within the ops manual. Those resources exist somewhere else. They're on their file share system or their intranets. They've got, here's our FF&E buying guide, or maybe that's in a construction manual. That information being duplicated in a couple of places, it rarely gets updated in the ops manual. The people that come back to us, the average time since the last since their ops manuals had been created is about 6 years. So they're creating this ops manual, which isn't useful to all audiences. It sits on a shelf. They then create other resources, use those resources, update those resources, and now their ops manual is woefully out of date.
So yeah, we hear that, where the manual sits as a static document. I mean, one of my big frustrations, I'll see new franchisors, maybe they franchise a year or two earlier. We didn't work with them, and the development company prepared a very static, very basic operations manual. And as they're growing, what we find is they're sort of ignoring the manual, and these franchisors are building other information points because they want to actually help the franchisee.
Right.
So like if I'm looking at healthy operations manual, or, I should say a healthy information ecosystem,
Yes.
what would be the mindset I should be adopting? Let's say I become a franchisor today.
Yeah.
Let's say we're working together. What does the right operations manual or information framework look like, and how should I be viewing it going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of depends on size a little bit, but since we began this by saying that we're redoing manuals, well, then what I would suggest is that we've got several units open, right? We've got some processes going. Change and growth are a part of every franchisor's business model. We hope to grow. We know that we're going to have maybe some co-brand units, or maybe some smaller units, or we're going to have new vendors, or we're going to add products, or what. Change and growth we know will happen. So why would we ever create something that can't be changed? And in general, that's what has always happened. Right? Somebody opens up Microsoft Word, a Google Doc, they write their 400 pages, and then it becomes difficult to change it and to grow it. So what we recommend, how we work with emerging clients, and then also when we redo manuals, is that we simplify. Anything that you write has to be managed, and it has to be published. So that means that that's taking away precious resources that could otherwise be used to help franchisees decrease their labor costs or increase their top line sales. So simplifying the manual, making it so that it says this is what we do, why we do it, who does it, how often they do it. These are the general parameters to doing it. Here are the resources for doing it. Here's the measurement, so we know that you've done it. And that's basically it. That's where we push people to go to the LMS for this, go to the grand opening manual for the ideas, more ideas on this. And now those pieces can be managed by the subject matter experts. Your FBCs can talk about best practices for grand opening. We really did this in this small market. We did this in a larger market, without having to update the ops manual.
So Bryan, you've described it before to me in our conversations, and what you're describing here is your advice is for the ops manual, or at least the approach, to be a hub and spoke model, right? As to information. So how do you help franchisors do that? And even if they're not working with you, what's the advice on how they could start making improvements and adopting that model?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to take one step back and talk about that there are really three aspects to information ecosystems, which you had talked about. There's creating the manual, there's how it's published, and there's how it's managed. And all three of those things are kind of interrelated. And if I were to write a 600-page manual and print it, then that publication doesn't do most people any good. It sits on a shelf, it collects dust, it's used as a doorstop. I've heard all the euphemisms, and they're right. Also makes it very difficult to update. And if something is difficult to update, it means that you won't. And that's one of the reasons why people move to an LMS, or they move to putting, say, a recipe guide in Microsoft PowerPoint. It's because it's easier to use. It's because you've got distributed authorships. So taking that use case into consideration, it means that the ops manual can be the hub, can be this information broker that says, our standard is that you put all of your people through our approved training method. And that approved training method is available here. And we point off to an LMS or to a file share that has PowerPoint decks that explain, how to do a sandwich builder, how to install wood flooring, whatever that happens to be. That can change every time you update a new franchisee. And in the beginning stages, you're going to, right? This is how we did it. And now as I teach somebody, I notice that my training needs to be updated here and here and here. The training manager is now the SME, can update that as often as they need to, and we don't have to go backward to update the operations manual.
So for a healthy approach, healthy franchisor ops manual ecosystem, what would that look like? Charles, they're using maybe this or that for an LMS system. They have their core manual, which is the heart or the information broker. They have these satellite information pieces, and this is how they use it in practice and how they update it.
Yeah. So in practice, there are all these topics that exist in several documents. So we'll talk about the possibilities of a library. All right, you've got your ops manual. You can have a training manual. I'm looking at a client now that has a manager's guide, which is essentially the things that every manager needs to know, especially in the first 2 weeks of being open. I have seen new unit development guides, which do everything from real estate selection to signing the lease to getting your architect and your GC. It can go down into paint color and to tile and to grout and to FF&E. But the grand opening kind of blends into that too. So a new unit guide, various training guides, a marketing guide, a local store marketing guide, and it kind of, again, depends on the brand. There may be more of those. So having a librarian in charge of all of the pieces, that librarian then updates to an LMS. The Learning Zen is a friend of yours, but there are others, Skooks and some others. Sometimes an LMS is overkill, and sometimes it's exactly what you need. All of these documents also then live on your intranet or your file share system, Microsoft, SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Docs, Dropbox. All of these are options, and we help folks with any of that. But that's where you keep your logos. That's where you keep your forms. And then the operations manual tells people how to use all of that and how to provision it.
I love that approach, because when I think about ops manuals, I get overwhelmed, and I know a lot of franchisors get overwhelmed. And even when we're having conversation with new franchisors, and when we're explaining the value of the ops manual, and I'm thinking of things like, sure, you need a section on marketing, but how detailed do you get? And like in practice, are you really relying on that manual, or you're developing in person, supporting that franchisees live? And it is overwhelming. One piece of advice I give our clients is to look at that ops manual as the foundation, but it does need to evolve. The friction, frustration points that you see when that first franchisee opens up or development, to me, having a live platform where you could develop videos and quizzes and information. But I do like your approach in saying, Charles, hub and spoke, ops manual really is the information broker or the conduit. I think that's a really helpful way of looking at how it should be approached. To the overwhelming part, Bryan, let's just say I'm on a limited budget. I'm an existing franchisor. Let's say, we're gaining traction. I have about 30 franchisees now. We're finally hit revenue sufficiency. What would be checklist items that you say, look, Charles, you need to check this, and that to see even if you have a healthy information ecosystem, to indicate what and where you need to update your ops manual.
Yeah, great. It's not just the ops manual. I know that's not really what you meant, but we refer to this as content chaos. And content chaos exists in every organization to some degree. It exists in mine, and I'm pretty good at this, right? I've managed Delta.com for a long time. Content chaos just exists. But the symptoms of content chaos, the biggest one is people not being able to find something. You go into your file share, you do a search for, and that's a keyword search. And you either get, you search for uniform, you either get every instance of the word uniform, even if it's like uniform commercial code. But you get all of that. You're across platforms. You really can't find anything. That's usually the number one thing that people come to us saying that there's a problem. I can't find. Another one, if you ever open up a doc and save as, simply to, like, let's say I'm going to open up a sales process for the West Coast, and I'm going to save as sales process East Coast. I'm just going to make a couple of modifications. Anytime you do that, you now have duplicate content. And if the universal information changes in one, you have to make sure to change it in both. And if you've got sales south and sales north, now you've got it in 4 places. And then if you create PDFs of that, you've got it in 8 places. And if you put it into the training, then you now have it in possibly 9 to 12 places. So when you make a change, you have to change it in 12 places. Simplification of this makes it so that you point to the right spot, and when you change once, you update everywhere. So a little bit of technology can go a long way. in helping with that, a content management system. So the content chaos points that we see are franchisees using old information. They've saved a PDF to their machine. They're using version 1 of the ops manual instead of version 3. Inability to find things, conflicting information, or duplicate information. Those are the big ones. There are other points as well. So my checklist for a franchisor is, number one, put somebody in charge. A person should know about all of your manuals. You don't have a marketing manual person, an ops manual person, and a construction. You have a librarian, not just authors. Number two, I would put in place an editorial calendar so that every topic is being reviewed at least once a year. Most of the time, what happens is that we don't notice something's out of date until we had to use it, we read it, and we were embarrassed in front of a franchisee, an attorney, someone, right? And that's when people tell me that it's been 4 years, 6 years since they've updated their ops manuals. So I would have an editorial calendar that says we're going to review everything once per year. The editorial calendar will also have the name of subject matter expert. This is who should read it and sign off on it. Those things right there are going to get you 60% of the way to where you need to be. An archive process is important.
My question is really, how should franchisors think about updates and upgrades? But let me give a real world example, because I have a little confusion here. I'm a new franchisor. How detailed am I getting in the ops manual when I talk about marketing?
Yeah. Well, so a brand new franchisor, the ops manual will probably do a little bit more work than, say, for a mature brand. A mature brand's going to have a more detailed program for marketing. I'm going to specifically go into marketing here because this is a really big area. How detailed should they get with it? The question is, how mature is their marketing infrastructure today? And marketing infrastructure is different than the style guide and the look and the feel and whether or not they've created digital ads. My question would be, if you're a restaurant, how do you do an LTO? Do you have the marketing infrastructure in place to know that you get 3 window clings, a door hanger, a ceiling hanger, table tents, and direct mail pieces? If you've got that infrastructure, then the ops manual should talk about how to provision that infrastructure. If I need a new menu board, I call or send an email to this person. This is my vendor. The vendor knows now what is approved and what's not approved. So that helps to take care of the compliance with that. An emerging brand should know these are the logos. This is where you find the logos. And these are the only ways you're allowed to use a logo. And if you would like to create anything, we must approve it. And then that's it. Because now what you've done is that there are so many use cases out there and you really don't know what they're going to run into. The biggest thing that you care about is that they come to you for approval. As you get more mature, you can go into more depth to say, here's how you do a local store marketing advertising plan or marketing plan. Here's how you contact local businesses to get complimentary sales. Those things will come over time, but they're really toward a more targeted audience. Their tactics, they will change. So the ops manual will continue to say, you've got resources in a Slack channel here. You've got you can call your VC. You can go to your local store marketing guide, which we will continue to update. Here's where you find the template to do a local store marketing plan, and that's on. So we're pointing to the resources, telling people how they fit together, and then that's evergreen. We don't have to update that in the ops manual. We update it in the individual manuals and the individual tools.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway, because that's always I mean, these are things we discuss with our clients, but we're not experts in it. And I couldn't see it working any other way. So you're pointing them to, that initial marketing guide or social media marketing policies and guide. And yeah, no, and not, I mean, these are just things I'm very interested in for our clients. How do you see franchisors addressing social media in their ops manuals and their policies and how they approach it?
Well, so I try to make it really clear with every client that I talk to is, number one, I'm not a franchise consultant. Number two, I'm not a franchise attorney. However, I have been the director of marketing for multiple brands, and I have done lots of local store marketing. That happens to be, where I come from in the franchise industry before I got to content management. This is where a lot of decisions happen that basically I offer them up and just say, you want A or B? A, all of your social media is centralized, and there's only one account, and we make all of those posts, and it's all really branding and product related, and you can't do anything except for, let's put in a sub process, send us an email that requests a post. Totally valid with that. The other way to do it is to allow everybody to have their own TikTok, their own Facebook, their own IG account. If I were a franchise consultant, I would recommend against that. But I'm not, so I just have to tell people what the pros and the cons are for that. And the cons are that your franchisees stink at photography. They're not any good at it at all. And when they go to, or they think they are, they're going to take photos of your product, and you're not going to like how that looks. So you then need to give them the resources of a photography library that they may only use approved images from there. You can put in place rules that say you are not allowed to show employees in your images. What if the employee leaves under bad circumstances? It happens in business all the time. If you're a mom and pop, that's not a big deal. When you're a franchise, maybe it is.
I do like when franchisors control social, but from the ops manual perspective, I think the big takeaway is very much that hub and spoke model where you keep building out these other tools and information pieces. In terms of LMS platforms, how actively involved do you see how active should a franchisor be in maintaining and using these platforms?
So this comes with growth, right? The emerging brands, the launching brands, they're just not going to be able to afford. Maybe they are if they're capitalized, but many of them are not be able to afford a learning management system. And also, it may be too soon for them. So you're ready for an LMS when you're ready to have somebody, when you're no longer talking one-to-one. When a franchisee comes in for training, if you've got the ability to train them one-to-one, then you do. And then before they open, you go out and a couple days before they open or a week before they open, and you help train their staff. And then you stay for an extra week and you train their staff. An LMS really comes into play when you need to start talking one-to-many, and you need to train one level down on an ongoing basis. And when that happens, then you usually have a training coordinator. Maybe it's somebody doing double duty, but very often what we see too is brands will overspend. They feel like they need to have the ability to have people be certified. We want to make sure that the guy chopping the chicken in the back of the house is certified to chop the chicken, to marinate the chicken. But why? That becomes data that never is really ever used. So unless you have a brand standard that says this absolutely must happen, and here's the penalty if you don't do it, then all that is maybe a little clutter or possibly a best practice and suggestion. So the learning systems can possibly grow with you if you don't have to start with a ton of videos. We offer HTML publication of your material. So after we create an ops manual, and we can do this with all of the SOPs, is very easily output to a website. And when we do that, then we also control the Word doc and the PDF of it, so that when you change once, you change everywhere. Now, if you want to add a video to the website, that here's a 3-minute video of what this recipe build looks like. Below that is the recipe, which makes it searchable and referenceable. And then in a recipe guide, we output it via PDF. Then all of that information is now intertwined. So when we change one, we change all of them. There are ways then to kind of build as you go. And without a training coordinator, most people will create ineffective training materials in the first place. So, you know, a 9-minute training video doesn't really do anybody any good. But 9 1-minute ones or 3 3-minute ones tend to be better and easier to manage.
How do you approach when you're working on a manual, educating your clients in terms of the legal component of how the manual fits into their ecosystem? I know you're going to refer to their counsel, but how do you view the legal component and the integration of the manual?
Great question. So the three real aspects where that comes into play. One is in whatever the franchise agreement says, either the Z has to do or the ZOR has to do. Services offered to the franchisee is a good example of that. So if the franchise agreement says we're coming out 4 days before opening, then we write down 4 days before opening, but we also talk about what the process is to bring somebody along with that. This will be scheduled after your CO, blah, blah, right? So we'll give more information about that. Another area where that really comes into play is in employment and staffing. And we try to stay away from that. I mean, clearly that's a gray area in the law. There's not a lot of precedent. We want to stay away from joint employer, but there are still best practices that you can put in, and you can use language such as, in our corporate units, we have found, or this is how we handle things, or we recommend you do whatever, or we refer you to state operations. So those legalities, if people want to go beyond the basics, then of course we ask them to check legal. The other area, which is in the main body of the ops manual, really comes in the form of compliance. And what can we mandate franchisees do, and what can we not mandate franchisees do? So if there's an LTO, can we mandate that all franchisees participate? I'm not sure that you can. Can we mandate and tell the franchisees how much they have to charge and exactly what that price is? Don't think you can. Can we mandate that the temperature be less than 40 degrees? Yes, that you can do. So if we write down a brand standard, then what we really do is encourage them to think about how that will also be enforced. Because if the brand standard is no nose piercings, then how far are you willing to go when an FBC goes into a unit and sees somebody, a good employee, with a nose piercing? Are you going to raise a stink? Are you going to have them fired? How far are you willing to go? Now that you've created a law, how far are you willing to go to enforce that law? So we always have them think about those kinds of things, so that it's franchisee relations in one way. You don't want to go and make somebody mad over a small nose stud. Are you going to take their franchise away from them? How will that work? So those types of back and forths, I recognize as a former BC, to say this is where friction will come between you and the Z. It's okay for you to be hard-nosed about compliance, but you need to make that decision. You need to do that intentionally, and not just leave it to your BCs to go in and be, power hungry. So I hope that answered your question. There are 3 different areas. There's the letter of the law. Yeah, the letter of the law, the ambiguity of the law, and then the we're making law.
Right. And the consistency. And as you were going over those points, which I think are critical, I also reflect on, when we're guiding our clients of, hey, our franchisee's not complying on X and Y. And my advice is, okay, well, let's build out a process. We don't want to escalate to legal notice from law firm claiming a default. We want to get to operational coaching and operational, if need be, defaults, and to make sure, as you go through this process, if you're a new franchisor, make sure your ops manual is aligning, educating the franchisee about, here's our standards, here's our evaluation, here's the deficiency, and building that framework of communication to create a record if we have to default someone, which we don't want to, but more important, to coach them. And so, I definitely think that there needs to be consistency with the ops manual. But overall, too, I think a big takeaway from our conversation, Bryan, is the viewpoint you're bringing to this in terms of the hub and spoke model, or I'm paraphrasing, but your ops manual being that information broker or guide to these other conduits. Because I think if franchisors look at it that way, we get beyond this static document. And in many cases, not many, but too many, they're ridiculous. I mean, I've seen some horrible operations manuals where, and usually it's a company that does everything. And so, they do everything. And, to the point where I'm looking at, it's a restaurant and the marketing section talks about, that the best way to build business is hand out business cards. And I just want to throw up. But so I think that's critical. What would you say are, and maybe the answer is, Charles, what's outdated is viewing the ops manual as a static document and not this ecosystem. But what would you say are some outdated practices when it comes to ops manuals that shouldn't be going on, but they're still lingering?
That is the big one. Is treating it as all things to all people, the 600-page gorilla. I mean, there may be some other little things in printing. Some folks still prefer to do that, which is okay in some industries. But why isn't this information available online? Why? Now, versioning, I suppose, is a big part of that. Like, you're sitting in a deposition and you need to know what policy was in place in April of 2023. You need a solid version of that manual, and it needs to be outputted and archived so that it's available to your legal team. But outside of that, information, why do I need to go to a PDF? Why do I need to open up a 3-ring binder? This should be available to me via website, should be available on my phone. I shouldn't have to pinch in Zoom. So digital first is kind of, that's where we point most people, and honest to goodness, we don't get there. But it's where most people should be going, is you start digital first, because now I can take that information and I can take a checklist, an open, mid, closed checklist, and I can put it into your POS system. I can output it to XML and you input it there. So again, change once, update everywhere. You're not duplicating the content, you're simply pushing it to a different channel. So yeah, simplifying it, talking directly to your audience, giving the amount of detail that is useful to a marketing person, but that the franchisor, hands off an investor franchisor or a multi-unit franchisor who has a manager who handles that stuff. We just need to tell them what we're going to hold them accountable to and what the resources are for achieving that goal. And then we can push that into another manual as to actually how to do it.
Yeah, look, Bryan, I appreciate, I think this is a great way to refocus franchisors on their mindset on manuals. And whether we call it an 800-pound gorilla and the hub and spoke model. I think this is really helpful advice that you're sharing. So I appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you. You can probably tell that that I love talking. It's content strategy, but there probably aren't many people who are content strategists just for franchises. But boy, do I enjoy this niche.
Yeah, and I will say our clients have like really good things to say about you. So it's good stuff.
I'm glad to hear that. We always strive for that. My goal is to make you the hero. So
Yeah, well, no, now we it's got to make our clients the hero, right? We're just here for that journey. But I appreciate it, Bryan.
thank you so much for having me.